Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Last episode, we successfully made the interior of the car look completely stock by reinstalling all the interior parts. And we even upgraded all our seats to brown leather, third-way adjustable buckets. After the interior, the plan was to button it all up, finish up the wiring, and get this thing closer to running and driving. But it's time to shift gears because we have officially submitted our build to be considered for the Toyo Tread Pass at the 2024 SEMA show. If you're not familiar with the Toyo Tread Pass, it's the show within the show. You have everything from an all-carbon R32 GTR, Tesla-powered all-wheel drive C10, ITB V12 FDRX7s, just to name a few. Toyo Tread Pass has the largest variety and most interesting builds at SEMA, and maybe even anywhere, period. If you go to SEMA, you can't miss checking out the Tread Pass. It would be a dream come true if we got a spot, but we won't know until the end of September, so we have to show the guys at Toyo that the car will be ready by then. So we're shifting our focus to the exterior because they're not going to let us in looking like this.
So go to Toyo's IG, spam the comment section, let them know you want the V10 Continental in.
Up until now, we haven't talked much about the body mods or what we want the car to look like, but we've been hard at work getting something together. In fact, we partnered with Abimelech Design. If the name sounds familiar, that's because he's got a ton of cool renders and designs on his page. He's been featured all over the internet, and more recently, he did Tavares's P1 McLaren render. So we're super fortunate to have him on board, and today we are pumped to finally be able to share with you guys the final render. The goal was to create an appearance package that resembled something that Ford would have made if they had injected a little bit of performance on the Lincoln brand, something to compete with the M's and the V's of the world. It was a lot of back and forth, and after many iterations, we think we landed on something worthy of the luxury Grand Touring tag. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Lincoln Continental V10.
Let's take a second to walk through the mods. In the front, we've extended the bumper, giving us larger vent openings that we filled with honeycomb grille for a more aggressive look. We're also adding a full ground effects package, starting with the front splitter, which flows into the side skirts. They continue back into the diffuser in the rear, where we retain the formed square style exhaust tips. A flush mounted spoiler rounds out the rear to help define the sporty appearance. We've chosen to leave some of the bits chrome to keep some of that Lincoln vibe, but all added parts will be made of forged carbon fiber to match the coil covers on the engine. The slammed appearance might not be something Lincoln would offer, but we can't deny how good the Conti looks laying frame. So we're going to be doing air suspension at all four corners. To round it all out, we have custom CNC machined wheels that mimic the concept's twisted blade design, but with widely spaced spokes and a deeper dish to show off those massive Brimbos. And the cherry on top is this V10 logo we created, and we think it suits the build perfectly. Let us know what you guys think and where we should put it on the car. So for our body kit, there are four main components we're going to be doing. It's the front bumper, the rear bumper, the side skirts, and the rear wing. And we're going to start with the side skirts. It's probably one of the harder things because we have to do it from scratch, or we're going to be doing it from scratch. So we've been playing around with the concept. We have the render, so we're looking at that, seeing what Mustangs do, what other cars do. And we went to our Home Depot and picked up some of this Foamular insulation board. So we're going to be cutting it and shaping it out of this board. What we got here, we cut out some foam core cross sections. And we're doing our favorite material, forged carbon.
Forged under the fires of Hades with millions pounds of pressure.
No, we just sprinkled some of this stuff on. We got our core, right? And then you lay on your carbon, your epoxy, put carbon, and then sand it to shape. So we got some preliminary shape here. This car has a really straight side skirt, so that makes it kind of easy for us to form, but we think we're going to try to follow this body line a little bit and add to it. So this is probably going to end up coming down to extend the car lower and also widen it a little bit to give it a little wider of a stance. And then as we come to the rear, we want to flay out the skirt a little bit so, you know, it kind of gets wider towards the back. And then that'll integrate hopefully to what we have in the rear bumper. The plan now is going to be to get a whole piece of foam on here instead of a little section. and really start sculpting it to see it on the car. So we're gonna take this down to the table saw, start cutting stuff up. Not long enough. That's always a problem.
After redoing the piece with the right length this time, we test fitted it to the car to check if our angle was right. With both pieces cut, we took the scrap piece we cut earlier and made a sample side skirt to play around with shapes and designs. We decided to give the front of the side skirt a slight undercut to flow into the fender. In the rear, we added a flare to give it a wider stance. Once we were happy with the shape, we used the sample piece as a template to transfer the lines and shapes onto our actual side skirt. Then it was just a matter of cutting, sanding, and more sanding until we arrived at the final shape. A quick check on the car and we were ready for the carbon. Alright, so we're done with our bucks here as side skirts. We try to match them as close as possible and came out pretty good. So we're happy with the design. Now we're ready to start laying the carbon, but we're not just going to lay the carbon on them freely like this, because you can see they're not very stiff. They're kind of warped a little bit. So what we're going to do, we're going to bolt these up to the car securely, and then we're going to lay the carbon on the car. Once we have the first layer or so, we'll be able to pull them out, maybe lay another layer of carbon, and then finish sanding. But the first layer is going to be on the car so we can make sure it's the right shape. It doesn't get all funky on us. So let's put this up in the car and start laying some carbon. We used a couple of screws to secure the foam to the body, and we also added tape to ensure the epoxy wouldn't get stuck to the car. I mixed up a batch of epoxy and started brushing it on the foam while Jack applied the carbon. We started off with as slight of passes as we could to avoid any bumpy, heavy areas. It didn't take long before we had a fully covered side skirt and we could finally get a glimpse of what it would look like once done.
Got the gloves on.
We left this curing overnight, but ran into a little bit of a problem. This is obviously
Tell
no
them
good.
what happened.
Well, I inverted the ratio of hardener and epoxy, so got way too much hardener, not enough epoxy, and this thing is just not curing right. So this whole thing
like
is
$40 of carbon on this.
Yep, so it's carbon, epoxy, it's all trash. Thankfully we have a lot more to use, but now we just wasted a whole day pretty much because this took us
What's
most
your
of the day yesterday,
excuse?
so I just don't know how to read.
Every order will get a ball of carbon. Put your orders in now, shopdiy.com, and get your ball of sticky ass carbon.
Alright, here we go.
You got the right one this time?
Resin. Blue does not mean hardener. Alright, let's try this again. I mixed up another batch with the proper ratio this time, and we started all over again. The uncured epoxy made it easy for the carbon to stick, so we knocked out the passenger side in no time. Then moved on to the driver's side, applying the same method of multiple light passes. The next morning, the side skirts had cured enough to be removed from the car, and they looked pretty good for the first coat. Before doing the next coat of carbon to fill any voids, we decided to give them a good sand. These are the side skirts after a couple of hours of sanding. We were just trying to flatten them out as much as possible, get some of the high spots out. This is still the first coat of carbon, so now we just washed them, got all the dirt out of them, and we're going to start on the second coat, which is going to be a full coverage. So any pink areas we're going to completely cover, then we'll be able to sand it one more time and these will be completely done. This second coat was a lot slower and a bit heavier too. We applied carbon on the entire part, but focused on the areas that were missing carbon from the first coat. While I wetted out all the carbon with epoxy, Jack went around and touched up any areas that needed more carbon. To finish it all off, we added a thick coat of epoxy on the entire part.
So while we let the side skirts cure, we're gonna start working on part 2, which is the rear bumper. So we're gonna just basically take what Abimelech put into the render and put that onto the car. So to do that, we got this. So this is a rear valance from a 2017 Mustang GT. So this is gonna just tuck up against the bumper. We're gonna have to cut off whatever we need there to get this to fit. And then we're gonna be sculpting in the square tips into the sides and painting this body color. And then of course doing the forged carbon fiber look on this. So first step is gonna be removing some material. Luckily I have some help. Alright, so I lied before. This one isn't exactly like Abimelech put into the design. That one is. So this is from a 2018 Plus Mustang S550, and this one is from a 2015 A17. You can see there's a few differences. This is actually attached to the bumper. They had to cut it off, but it's body painted, which was a nice feature of this. But this one is more aggressive. So it has the bigger cutouts for dual tips, and it's a little bit narrower in the center section with more pronounced features here. So I mean, this is really what was in the render, and it's more of an aggressive look. So we're gonna try to fit this in. We found it on Facebook after we already started cutting the bumper for that guy. So we got about 80% of the way there, but now we're gonna try to fit this in. So the plan, like I said, is to use the stock tips. So the stock Continental tips are these I don't know what shape this is. Parallelogram, a rhombus. Anyway, these are the stock tips. So we took a piece of paper just to get. We took a piece of paper just to get the profile of what the tip sizes. And that's another feature here, is these are much bigger, so we could position these probably a little better, but it's too big for the size of or to get the full cutout we need for the pipe. So we're gonna have to figure that out. This one kind of, we could have cut this out pretty easily, but we don't want to take the easy way out. So we're measuring out some small pieces of plastic here. We're gonna use these to basically weld to the existing bumper, put a notch in there, and then we're going to be able to use the original clips to clip into these clips. So yeah, those will clip into here. We'll glue this to the bumper, and it'll be removable and hold it in place while we finish up the bumper.
We have it all mounted, or semi-mounted, where we want it now. Fits pretty good.
We used a combination of super glue and epoxy to attach the tabs. After the epoxy cured, the diffuser was able to be attached to the bumper with a satisfying click. We drilled a couple of holes on the bottom of the bumper to bolt the diffuser side legs on. With everything secured, it was time to test fit the bumper and diffuser to the car for the very first time. Oh yeah, that looks really good. Alright, so we ended up cutting the edge of the skirts off, and we made our own pieces that'll get bolted on up here, and then we'll integrate it into the skirt. But before we do that, because we want to mount it back on the car to do that, we want to finish up the tip. So like we said, we're going to use the Continental square tips, the stock ones. This is the trim piece from the original bumper we cut off, and the plan is to get this to fit into here. This kind of holds the exhaust tip, it locates it, so we want to try to maintain those features to make sure it sits nice. And then this guy is going to get put into there, but we have to cut this out and glue this on. We've already done that side, so that is what it's going to end up looking like. So it's just glued in. We'll epoxy this whole thing and sand it smooth. It should be good. So while I cut this out, Diego's going to get started on the rear wing.
For the rear wing, what we're trying to do is essentially adding a trunk lip, and we have a couple ideas here. So we've already mocked up some pieces. This is kind of the first iteration. We're trying to follow the line of the trunk. We're trying to play with different middle sections and exterior sections, the corner here, but this is the idea. And I think we've kind of locked in on the final idea. We're going to keep this profile very similar to this. We're going to integrate this better so we don't have this step here. The middle part we're going to actually make smaller, so the exteriors are going to have a little bit of a extended wing. I'm already working on this side so we can kind of look at the whole thing. And if we're happy with the design, then we can finalize, maybe remake some of these, and then start laying some carbon. This is going to be essentially the same thing as the side skirts. We're going to use this as the buck, and then we'll just apply epoxy, carbon, sanding. It'll be all done. Getting the shapes right and making everything fit the way it's supposed to meant we spent pretty much the entire day sanding and cutting foam. But the end result sure makes it all worth it. Alright guys, the wing is ready to get its first coat of carbon fiber and epoxy. So I've already mixed up a little bit of epoxy. I'm going to let it set for a couple minutes so that it doesn't drip down because of the way this is taped up. Jack is almost done with the bumper. He's had to redo that piece like 4 times. This side came up pretty good, so that's the idea. He completed this with some foam, and we'll be able to cover all of that with epoxy and carbon once it finishes that side. But we're working through the night, trying to get this done this weekend so we can put the first coat of epoxy over this rear diffuser. Before applying the carbon to the diffuser, we had to do some fine-tuning of the side pieces because we were not happy with the way they merged into the Mustang part. With all that done, we started applying epoxy and carbon to the entire part with slightly heavier coats just to save some time. The next day, with all the epoxy cured, it was time to spend the next several days doing something so dangerous that required a level of protection unlike anything else. Yeah, it's just more sanding. Except this time we were sanding quite a bit of carbon and epoxy away, so we fully suited up, because if any of you have ever worked around fiberglass or carbon, you know how itchy this stuff gets. It's just the worst. Alright guys, hopefully I've put down now the second to last coat of epoxy on the side skirts, so everything's looking good and flat. I just went through in some areas, you can see it's still a little bumpy. That's the areas where I just laid touch-up carbon pieces that we're showing the foam through. And this is the wing. It's got now carbon on the back and the top, so this is now drying out, so we can put a second to last coat as well. And Jack's been working on this rear diffuser for the last 3 days, I think now, sandy epoxy, and I think it's now at a point where it's starting to take shape.
Get there. The hard part, right, we had to add this with foam, but this foam backing now is starting to interfere with parts, so...
Yeah, he's been trying to test fit the exhaust tips, but it looks like it's rubbing on the foam.
So we could finally remove the foam, and here's a little trick to get this foam out. You just hit it with some acetone brake clean, or and it should dissolve, and we don't need it, right?
We don't need the foam now that
You
the
sure?
carbon's
Because once this goes
hardened.
away, my beautiful
That's not going to affect
Michelangelo
the
is...
epoxy, right?
No, it shouldn't.
It's not fully cured. It hasn't been 72 hours.
So this will just dissolve all the foam, and what we'll be left with, just turn like a gum ball, and you could just remove it. You know, some of the glue, because we glued pieces together, is not gonna, yeah, it's not going to dissolve that, but all this stuff.
There you go. Now we can test fit the exhaust tip. We'll probably do the same thing on this side. And finish sanding.
1 week later.
So we haven't recorded much, but we spent the last week sanding, putting on more epoxy, sanding, putting on carbon, and we finally come to a point where they're pretty much done. They might need a little more cutting and buffing once we get it on there, but we want to see what it looks like. We want to give you guys a sneak preview, so we're going to get these things onto the car. We got the rear wing over there. It's drying with its final coat, so we'll get that put up when it's drying, but we're really excited. We're going to mount this up on the bumper, put the tips in, put the side skirts on, and just get a glimpse of the rear of the car. There it is on the car. It freaking looks pretty damn good for what we've done here. We've added those bits on there, and it really sets the car from the back. It looks much wider. It's got way more presence. But we obviously have a little bit more work left, so that's just held up with tape. It's still pretty bumpy, so we got to sand that down. And then we got this, I don't think we showed this, but we cut out the diffuser here as a separate part, and the reason for that is we want to paint this body color to match. And then this is the forged carbon fiber to give it that little more OEM touch look, with that being body color. That pretty much sums it up for 3. So we got 3 of the 4 parts done. The 4th biggest one is the front bumper. So I got the front bumper, the splitter. We've already started cutting it up. It's in about like 5 or 6 pieces right now, but we gotta stay tuned for the next video to see what we're doing there, which should be interesting. So for now, we're gonna leave it here. And remember, you can't buy a body kit for Lincoln Continental, build it.